Okay, so this is going to be the video for lecture and lab 8, which is proprioception and plyometrics. So we're going to start with proprioception and balance. So the difference between balance and proprioception is, obviously we all kind of know what balance is, and it's just the ability to hold your center of gravity and maintain equilibrium, versus proprioception might be a term that you guys don't know yet, but proprioception is just the capacity for you to kind of know where your joint is in space. So if you think about like gymnasts, dancers, things like that, like those people are generally very good at proprioception because they have to be so bodily aware. So there's a couple of tests that we can use to assess their balance and assess proprioception. These aren't necessarily exercises that you would use, but these are going to be just tests to see where their baseline balance is. So we are going to go through 3. The first one is going to be a static assessment, and then the last 2 are going to be functional assessments. So this first one that we use is going to be called the balance error scoring system, and we use this here with our athletes as a baseline assessment to do concussion testing. So it involves, technically it's 6 tests of 20 seconds, and then you just hold the position in 3 different stances. So we're going to start, and Bethany's going to do the best for us. Okay, so for the first part of the best, the first position is going to be a double leg stance. So you just want to make sure that their feet are all the way together and the hands are on the hips with their eyes closed. So eyes closed and hands on the hips is going to be something that is standard throughout all 3 positions. So we're going to start here, and then whenever they close their eyes, you're going to start a timer for 20 seconds. And essentially, say I'm recording this for 20 seconds, what I'm looking for is errors. That's why it's called the balance error scoring system. I'm looking for her to open her eyes, to start losing her balance, to move her hands off of her hips, anything that's going to indicate that she's lost her balance. Okay, you're good. So the next one that we're going to have them, the next position that they're going to be in is going to be a single leg stance. So then in this sense, you're going to ask them what is their dominant versus non-dominant leg. So if you were to kick a soccer ball, which leg would you use? The right. So that means her non-dominant is going to be her left foot. So I'm going to have her stand in a single leg stance on her left foot. Same thing, hands on their hips, eyes closed, and I'm going to begin starting the timer. So as you guys can see, she's starting to sway, so that would be an error there. So and then you're wanting to count however many errors that they make. So that's another error there. She tapped her foot down. If she were to open her eyes, that would be an error. And then if it takes them over 5 seconds to regain their balance again after losing their balance, it would be an additional error. So the scoring can get a little bit complicated. You're good, Bethany? The scoring can get a little bit complicated, but just do your best to count as many as you can. The best can be a little bit subjective depending on the tester, so as long as you just make sure you're doing it the same for every person that you do it with. Okay, the last position is going to be a tandem stance. So what you want to do is you're just going to have them take the foot that was up in the air, so their dominant foot, and just place it right in the front. So non-dominant is going to go in the back, and you kind of want to position yourself so that you can see their feet here, and then making sure that you're in the full view. So what you're going to want to do next is, again, just whenever she closes her eyes, we're looking for sway. There's an error right there. There's another error. So it's within the 5 seconds, but if it took her more than 5 seconds to regain her balance, like now, that would be a second error. Again, the highest that you can get on the best, you're good. The highest that you can get on the best is a 60. So you can only get 10 errors per position. Okay, so for the second half of the best, you're going to have them do the same 3 positions and or the stances that they just did, but we're just going to move them onto a foam pad. So you, again, are just going to start with the double leg stance, so have them get onto the foam pad. And again, we're looking for the same errors. Usually as we move them onto the foam pad is when they start getting more errors. That's very common. Usually the double leg stance is okay, but as we move into the single leg and the tandem, that's where people really start to lose their balance. So again, 20 seconds for this position, and then when they're done, we're just gonna move into the single leg stance. So she said her non-dominant was her left, so we're gonna make sure that we're still doing the left leg. Again, looking for any errors, so that would be an error there. There's another error, and so on and so forth. So then the last one, so the 6th position or the 6th test is going to be the tandem stance. Usually with people who are taller, they need to go diagonally, but again, so non-dominant is in the back. Yep, so make sure that they switch their feet appropriately, and then that you're in the correct position to be able to see their whole body. So again, looking for any errors here as they start to lift her foot. You can see her start to lift the head of that metatarsal. That's technically an error. And then if she can't get back into the position within 5 seconds, it's another error. And then if she just doesn't ever regain her balance, then she automatically gets a 10. So that is going to be the static balance assessment, or the balance error scoring system. The first functional balance assessment that we're going to be doing is called the Star Excursion Balance Test, and these are all in your guys' lab, so if you guys get confused, you can refer back to them. But the reason why it's called the Star Excursion Balance Test is because obviously there's a little star on the floor. And with this one is what we're doing is we're just testing functional balance. So obviously you would want to test both legs. So we're just going to have her test her right leg this time. And so what you want them to do is kind of do a single leg squat and then reach as far forward on these lines, on each one of these lines as they can. And then they're just going to start going around the clock and making sure they're using the same leg. So go ahead. You're going to start with the first one, the front, the second one. And she's just trying to reach as far forward or backwards as she can. Where it starts to get a little bit complicated is when they start having to cross behind the back. People have a tendency of wanting to switch their foot into the front, and they have to make sure, especially on this one, that they reach around all the way. So this one usually is a little bit more difficult. On this one, we're not necessarily counting the errors, but we're measuring how far they can actually go. And then you would want to switch legs and then go the opposite direction. So we're going in a clockwise pattern, and again, just making sure that they switch their legs behind them instead of switching in front. That's people, it's easier for people, and so they definitely will try to switch and cheat there. But that is going to be the Star Excursion Balance Test. Okay, so the next functional balance assessment test is called the Y balance test. And the reason why is because it's very similar to the Star Excursion Balance, but it's obviously in a Y shape. And the way that the patient is actually going to do the Y balance test is very similar to the Star Excursion balance test. So you have them get on and say we just decide to test her right leg first. She's going to then, with her opposite foot, she's just going to kind of come into that single leg squat position and reach and push that little block as far forward as she can while maintaining her balance. And then she's going to move and push the back one posterior. Good. And then with this last one, making sure they're crossing behind themselves again. People are going to want to cross in the front, but just as far forward as she can go. And then, of course, we would test the opposite side. Okay, so the next test that's on your guys' lab is called the single leg land and stick. So with this one, you would have them up on just a little bit of a platform. And what you want to have them do is they're going to cross their arms in front of their chest, and then they're kind of just going to hop off their little platform, and then they're going to try to stick the landing for 20 seconds, and then hold it, and you're going to count their errors. So that would be an error because of her abduction. The trick with this one, though, is that they are going to have to do it with their eyes closed. So I had her do it with her eyes open first just to go through the motion. Again, familiarization with what they're actually doing and part of your patient communication. But then you're going to have them close their eyes and then go ahead and jump off. And again, you're going to see like a few more errors with that. Again, 20 seconds for that. All right, the next functional test that's on your guys' lab is the dynamic hop test. So there's a lot of ways that you guys can do this. I've just put some Post-it notes on the ground, and go ahead and stand in the center. And essentially what you're asking them to do is just hop single leg and hold each position for 5 seconds. So say that I tell her to hop to all of the pink ones. So go forward, then to the right, then to the left. So again, so she should have been holding those for 5 seconds. Or you can like number them and you can have them just go, or you can say jump in like a clock formation or jump in a square pattern. But just having them single leg jump in a planned order, if that makes sense. Okay, so on your guys' lab, you guys can see that there's several ways to functionally progress balance exercises. So the first, and I think most obvious one, is going to be moving them from a double leg stance to a single leg stance. So all those tests that we had Bethany do, you saw she was on one leg. So potentially if that's too difficult, we could regress that and make it a little bit easier and just have her do everything on 2 legs. Or say we want to start on 2 legs and then we move to 1 leg. And then obviously you saw in the best that we had them change the surface, so adding any sort of unstable surface, and that's going to make it more difficult for them. And then if we want to start them, say on an AirX, then we could move them to a Bosu ball, which would be even more difficult because it's an even more unstable surface. Eyes open and eyes closed, you saw that in the last part. Obviously, as she starts to close her eyes, she's going to lose one of the senses that helps in keeping your balance, and so when we close the eyes, that's going to make things more difficult. So you can use that to your advantage as a progression or a regression. And then adding in a more dynamic component. So obviously we saw with the best it was a static, and then as we moved into dynamic hop test, if we want to make things more dynamic, also in terms of start doing ball toss or something where they have to do multiple tasks, that's also going to make things more difficult. So I'm going to show you guys a couple examples of those, and then just different types of surfaces that you guys can use to your advantage to either progress or regress an exercise. So if we look at, we have different types of surfaces. So generally speaking, with rehab equipment, this is going to be moving from easier to more difficult in terms of the stability of the surface. So one thing that we could do is we could just do ball toss. So that adds in another task, and just start, say we want to start simple, we want to do ball toss on 2 legs. So I would toss the ball to her, good, and then toss it back. Now if we wanted to make that, if we wanted to make that more difficult, then I would progress her onto the foam pad. Pick this up, and then again, ball toss on that. Now if I wanted to make this harder for her, I could just have her move to a single leg stance, and then we could still ball toss. Or I could have her close her eyes. Okay? But say she likes the ball toss and she doesn't want to lose that part, we could just move her onto a more difficult surface. But then we would have to kind of go back, so we wouldn't start on single leg with ball toss. We would probably start her back just on a double leg stance with her eyes open, and ball toss this way. So as you progress or change something, you have to keep in mind that you might have to regress them in some other capacity. So if I was to move her then onto a single leg on the Dynadisc, would probably be more difficult than a double leg on the Bosu, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a sliding scale. You have a bunch of different factors going on, but then it also gives you the capacity to change things at your will if you want to change the surface versus the actual activity or double to single leg stance. We could also have her close her eyes for any of those things. And those are just simple ways that you can either progress or regress your balance exercises. So with the balance exercises, you want to obviously take into consideration the functional needs of the patient, any sport-specific activities, and again, kind of like I said, it's a sliding scale of all of those factors. So if we move them to single leg stance, then we might need to make the surface a little bit easier. You can't increase and advance all of those aspects all at once, but there are several ways that you can make it harder. But just keep in mind their core. You want to make sure that they're activating their core. We've talked about that. Looking at their whole body, so not just their hips, but their knees, their ankles, everything like that. And it's one thing that you can tell them in terms of helping with their balance is if they just watch one stationary object. So I usually tell people to just fixate on like a doorknob or something that's not going to move, and that can help improve their balance. Okay, so the second part of this lab is going to be on plyometrics. Now, plyometrics is kind of the more advanced side of rehab. Once they start mastering plyometrics, that's kind of when you would look back into potentially getting them back into some sort of modified practice, but they're kind of at the tail end of their rehab in terms of what they can do. So the plyometrics has 3 phases. So there's the eccentric phase, the amortization phase, and the concentric phase. And one easy way to think about this is just plyometrics is essentially jumping. So if they have contact with the ground, they contract to remove themselves from the ground or kind of be in the air, and then the concentric phase is when they land. So if you think about like a jump squat, there's the eccentric phase where they load to jump off the ground, the phase where they're out or off the ground, and then when they have to land is going to be that concentric phase. So you want to make sure that that amortization phase, or that time that they're actually off the ground or lose contact with the ground is as quick as possible. So plyometrics are meant to be quick and fast, and that's part of what makes them so difficult. So you want to make sure that your patient is ready for plyometrics before you actually begin any exercises. But this starts to be or rehab gets a little bit more functional and a little bit more fun for the clinician and probably the athlete or the patient as well. Keep in mind surfaces, keep in mind like if they have a high competitive level or if they're just a general population person who probably doesn't really necessarily need this but would help in just functional day-to-day stuff if they had to. But then there are a couple of plyometric examples in the Higgins books. So there's the lower extremity is going to be on page 192, and then examples for plyometrics for the upper extremity is going to be on page 193. So you guys can take a look at those, but I also am just going to go through a couple examples with Bethany of pretty common plyometric exercises that you can do. Okay, so the first and most common one that I think of for the lower extremity is just going to be a squat jump. So have her come down and do it like a normal squat, and just obviously at this point they're probably familiar with that. But then they're going to do a regular squat, jump as high as they can, and then land. So that was the eccentric was at the beginning, the amortization phase was when she went up, and the concentric phase is when she came down. So go ahead and do it one more time for me. Good. Another example is you could have them do like the switch lunges or the jump lunges. So anything, again, where they're starting to lose contact. So they would have to rapidly switch their foot position when they do this, but this would also be considered a plyometric. Okay, you're good. These are all, again, progressions of just a normal squat or a normal lunge. Another thing that you can have them do is, if say they can't do that, but they have access to stairs, they can do these like toe taps. Technically, these would be considered plyometrics because, again, they have to switch their foot positioning. And that could be a progression of just stepping up the stairs. And then lastly, you can have them do a box jump. This is kind of similar to a squat jump, but it makes it a little bit harder because they actually have to land on a higher surface. Good. Okay, for the upper extremity, plyometrics can get a little bit hard because you think about, I feel like the first thing people think of is like a clap push-up, and obviously that's not necessarily functional, nor is that something that everyone can do. So what I like to use is med balls, and any sort of plyometric where you're having them toss a ball and they have to lose contact with the ball is also technically considered a plyometric. So go ahead and you can just start with med ball slams or soccer ball slams. Obviously this one isn't very heavy, but that's technically a plyometric. Another one that you can have them do is a chest pass. So you can either have them do it while they're laying down and just have them on the ground and then just do chest passes this way. You can also have them do chest passes with you or against a wall. Those are all considered plyometrics. And then another common one that we use is a burpee. Again, I'm not going to make everybody do this depending on, you know, what they need or if that's functional or realistic for them. However, a burpee is technically an upper extremity plyometric.